And I'm going to hand over to you now. So thank you so much for joining us.
Fab. Thanks so much, Phoebe. And hi, everyone. Great to meet you. As Phoebe mentioned, this is just a bit of an introduction to PR, kind of the key basics of PR, but also how you can use it for your project to kind of really celebrate the great work that you're doing, get some more attention, and yeah, help to build towards success further. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. I'll just start with a bit of an introduction. So as I mentioned, I'm Shannon. I'm Senior Associate Director at Ready10. Ready10 is a PR agency. We specialise in consumer and trade comms. We are 8 years old as an agency, just celebrated our 8th birthday. And we have worked with the team at Youth Music for a number of years, initially supporting the Youth Music Awards that take place every year. And then now more recently, over the last kind of year and a half, working with them on their kind of broader strategy to kind of really help support grassroots music and raise awareness of the challenges within the space, and also how communities can help. So we'll talk a bit more as well as we go through about some of the work we've done to kind of add a bit of colour to what we'll be discussing. But please do feel free, if there are any questions throughout, just shout or drop them in the chat. And yeah, without further ado, we'll kick off. So just thought a bit of a getting to know you section. Feel free to kind of say it out loud or write it in the chat, but just wondering kind of, has anyone here got much experience in PR? Have you used PR before in your projects? And kind of any initial thoughts or experiences to share? But everyone's getting warmed up, so we'll continue through. And if there are, oh, is there?
I did see Michael. Did you just put your hand up?
Yeah, I thought I'd just say something. If that's okay.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Zippy. I run an organisation called Ministry of Life Education in Cardiff, in Wales. We're a music and media organisation, so we do a lot of Instagram, Facebook. It used to be Facebook years ago. I've been at it for 15 years, so it used to be MySpace a long time ago. But yeah, we used to just put up posters around the city for our music events and things like that. Most of the stuff we do now is just like, I don't want to have a business TikTok. We have talked about setting one up, but I'm kind of hoping to leave that to the younger members of the group. Yeah, so I'm just looking for some tips and tricks really on how people do things nowadays, really, because I used to just run around putting up posters. That's what I used to do.
Oh. Brilliant. Okay, well, yeah, we'll hopefully answer that and give some tips and some kind of key takeaways for you. And to your point about TikTok, we have got a little bit in here about how we can really use our own channels as well, because PR traditionally lives in the earned space. So, creating stories that media will write about without being paid for, obviously conversely to advertising. But then there are ways that we can really harness our own channels as well, whether that be, as you say, TikTok or Instagram, X, etc. So yeah, hopefully we'll get some nice tips in there for you. I've noticed as well that, no worries. And Tom from Steps has dropped a message and is here. And I know that you've done quite a bit of PR and we've seen some of your work out there as well in the media, Tom. So looking forward to, towards the end of this session, having a bit more of a discussion about learnings we can take from you guys and your experiences as well. And yes, thank you to everyone who's popped messages in there. Great to meet you all. And yeah, hopefully we'll cover some of these points as we go through, but just shout otherwise. We've kind of touched then on, from Zippy, what you think kind of PR is and good PR. Any other thoughts in terms of where you've seen PR work really well, or where you kind of, any questions around what it is that makes good PR?
Was that question to me?
Just in general to the group.
Oh, okay, sorry.
No problem at all.
I've recently had people doing some press releases for me, which is cool. The lottery have been doing some press releases and sending them out to local newspaper, things like that. So that's been pretty cool. And we did manage to get on ITV as well, so that was pretty cool.
Brilliant.
But yeah, Yeah, I'm not so au fait with writing press releases. But yeah, I don't know if there's any information on that you guys have.
Yes, we have got a section on press releases in here, so that's perfect, and hopefully we'll answer that. And Kate James, I've just seen your note, PR always seems to go to the bottom of the to-do list, and that is the case. Often you're not alone in that. Lots of kind of brands, projects, teams find the same, because it's the one that's kind of sometimes considered as the nice to have. It's often a bit harder to measure the kind of tangible results of it. But hopefully what we'll discuss today is some kind of really easy, straightforward takeaways that kind of make it feel less of a kind of big task, and something that can then evolve as you go through and hopefully start to feed up towards the top of that to-do list. But yeah, you are not alone in that. We hear that a lot, particularly when it comes to kind of budgets and planning and things like that. Great. And is there any brands that you see that you think does really like PR really well, or even kind of marketing in general? Any brands that you see on social come up a lot, or anything that you see in the press where you think that's been really clever? I won't put everyone on the spot here, but if you do think about it, anything, just let me know. And I've seen Kate's just raise her hand.
Yeah, I was working with someone recently who said, and she pointed out quite rightly, that oat milk is something that's had like this massive resurgence, and part of it's due to just really great PR. It was previously seen as something, wasn't it, that was a bit like sort of quite niche and maybe a bit like environmentalist in a sort of like bad way. Yet it's become something that's like just really trendy now. All of the oat milk brands have got this really cool marketing thing going on, and I've just been amazed at how that has changed maybe over about 5 years. It's gone from I work in classical music, and I think about those things all of the time, because I think that sometimes our image is one thing and it could so easily just be another. Why can't we be the next oat milk?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's a really interesting point, and Oatly specifically is one that comes up quite a lot when when you talk to brands about who PR that they've seen, and kind of almost who they would like to who they aspire to be like when it comes to their communications. Oatly comes up a lot, inside and outside of the oat milk space. So I think they've really kind of set a precedent for oat milk brands, and also just in general kind of alternative and challenger brands to come out and be really bold with their position and be really bold with their beliefs, and unapologetically true to their core values as a brand. And I think that's something that's really powerful, that a lot of brands and teams can take inspiration from. But yeah, Oatly's definitely one that's really made its name for itself. We've seen a couple of others come through in terms of Doc Martens as well, especially in the music space. Absolutely. I mean, it's really interesting when brands, that are considered traditionally to sit in one sector, so fashion, for example, with Dr. Martens, then start to own different pillars of society. And really, that's a really good example of knowing your audience super well. So for Dr. Martens, for example, they know that this audience highly indexes in music. They're really engaged with music and really passionate about it, and seek brands that are going to reflect those values. And that's why then they've done that with music. They've gone into the music scene and really kind of made a name for themselves there. So not only are they known for fashion, but then suddenly you're starting to see them in music as well. And for consumers, it feels like they're really kind of aligned with everything that they're already interested in. Great, so we'll continue on. As I said, feel free to keep sharing these thoughts in the chat, and do kind of flag your hand up if you want to discuss anything. But the key things we're going to be talking about today, just wanted to really streamline it. Ideally, you'll each go away and kind of remember as much of this as possible. So I thought the best way to do that is keeping it really straightforward. And in PR, we love a bit of alliteration. So we've got 4 M's to consider for your PR and comms that we'll be talking about today. So the first is the moment. So when should we be showing up as a brand? When should we be getting a story out there to the press? When should we be talking about the great work we're doing? The second is the message. What should that look like when we go out and communicate? What do we need to think about in terms of getting across, and how do we bring that to life? The materials, so to your point previously, the press releases and other assets that we can use to really kind of tell that story. I think often PR is considered to be just press releases and lots of copy, but there's lots of different ways that you can really kind of bring your story to life. So we'll be touching on that. And then the final one that we'll be discussing is the media. So once we've got all this great, we've got the moment right, we've got the message we want to tell, and we've got the materials to help tell us, then where do we put it? Who do we go out to? And how do we know which is the right media and which are the right spaces to communicate through? So we'll start with the moment. So there are kind of two key occasions during which we believe it's the right time to tell your story. The first one being you've got new news. And I guess that's the most obvious one. You know, you've perhaps received some fresh funding that you want to talk about. It might be that you are doing some fundraising. It might be that you've started a great initiative within your project, within your work, within the team that you want to shout about. Now this is kind of the most natural, easiest, if you like, place to start when it comes to sharing news, because there's already a story there. You're not trying to create something. You've already got something to go out and kind of tell the world. So that's the first point. The second is a relevant news agenda. And this is when you inject yourself into a conversation that's already in the press. So it might be, for example, with the likes of youth music. You know, there's been a lot of conversation last year, and there was a lot of talk about AI in music and how people are using AI in general to kind of help with their lives, and specifically in music. So how could youth music show up in that space? You know, obviously, as a grassroots music charity, having a lot to say in that space, a lot of, you know, really interesting data and an opinion in the space. There was an authentic opportunity for us to show up. So that's a good example then of when there's already a conversation going on, but you can use it as an opportunity to get your name out there as well and comment. One key thing I would say on this is a lot of the time it's about that the hardest bit is the relevance and making sure that there is really a relevant moment. You might have seen, particularly on social media, there are times when there's a big conversation. It can be politics, it comes up with politics a lot. If there's a big conversation in politics and there's a brand that has never touched politics before, has never spoken about politics before, and tries to jump on that bandwagon, then it can really, you know, make you quite vulnerable as a brand. And, you know, consumers, we're all consumers sat here today, even if we're in the marketing world or not. You know, I'm sure everyone's seen an example of a brand talking about something that makes you cringe a bit. You think, oh, they've really not got a right to talk about that. And it switches you off. You know, we're savvier than ever. We're not looking for brands to kind of pull the wool over our eyes or try to convince us that they've got something to say in a space when we know that actually it doesn't feel authentic. So when it comes to telling a story and to inject yourselves into a news agenda, my number one tip there would be authenticity, just questioning, have we got a right to play in this space? Have we got a genuine opinion, or have we got data, even better, to support what we're saying in this space? And that can really help us get traction. And just a couple of examples here. I've mentioned youth music, but just to kind of add a bit of colour to this point, of, you know, bringing stories to life when we've got something to say, but also jumping onto the relevant news agenda. So the example on the left here is when the Brit nominations were announced, and there being, you know, a huge lack in representation for female artists. This year, fortunately, there was great work towards amending that and shifting us forward, and actually then there was a lot more representation in the nominations for 2024. So it's about music, it's about the pipeline into music, and, you know, the talent in the music industry that's being celebrated, which felt a really natural place for youth music to provide a comment. And so that's where we worked with Matt, the CEO, to provide a comment, you know, celebrating this move forward from the Brits and this more inclusivity within the nominations, but also, you know, with a look to the future, making sure that we're not resting on our laurels and that the industry is continuing to work hard and improve itself, because we're all on a journey when it comes to, you know, more representation, more diversion, more diversity, more inclusivity and equity. The example on the right is a really good example of when you've had natural news yourself that you've announced, but actually other opportunities come up to tell that story again. And this isn't, you know, keep coming out, a year later, putting out the same news, but it's, again, spotting those opportunities in the media where it's relevant for you to kind of have another voice. So this example was where we did a report, a thought leadership report, which looked at kind of all the state of the nation, essentially, when it came to AI. And how young people are using AI in music. So we did a big piece of research. We looked at how consumers are engaging with AI when it comes to making music, and we put that out to the media. It did really well and got picked up really well at the time, which was last year. But then at the beginning of this year, we saw the conversation pick up again. Once again, AI and music was being spoke about together in the press. And we thought, well, we've got some really brilliant data on this, that they're already talking about it again. Why not offer them data from our report last year to help support that conversation that they're having and to bring it to life a bit more? And so that's when we injected ourselves in the conversation again, and working with Matt, providing quotes, which we know work really well with media. We helped to support their stories, and it helped us get a bit more awareness once again. Abby, I've just seen you popped your hand up.
Yeah, hi Shannon, and hello everyone. So I'm those of you who don't know, I'm head of marketing and communications at Youth Music. And I just thought it was worth saying as well, I completely appreciate that we are in a position where, we do have a PR agency, and we can, it's really important for us that we can advocate for why the work of all the projects that we invest in is so important. So it's important we do things like pieces of research so that we can justify, why we need to get more funding and for, to be able to ultimately distribute to projects. But I appreciate that, not everyone has that opportunity. So I was just going to say, actually, where we talk about, say, AI, for instance, and it's really kind of high up on the national agenda, it's also high up on regional agendas. And actually they're kind of like threshold for what is considered something kind of media worthy isn't necessarily as high as national. So yes, of course, like they would love it if you could do some polling or research, but also it's just thinking about, okay, AI as an example is a topic which is going to continue to gain momentum. So is there something that you could even put on at your project which is related to AI that then you can kind of promote through your local media because you know that topic's going to be interesting? Or can you gather young people and have a kind of roundtable discussion, maybe an informal one with if your young people are a bit older, around AI and what that might mean for music or the local community? Or it's just kind of, I just wanted to acknowledge, I appreciate that we can't all do a poll or a survey, but there are other ways that you can take the same essence of what Shannon is saying. And I think likewise, the one on the left, again, that's obviously national, it's Mail Online, but again, there will be topics in your local area where there's things that you can comment on, that you can really establish yourself, establish those relationships. I know you'll come on to kind of media, but establish those relationships with your local media so that if they're running a story on anything related to young people and or music and creativity, it might have nothing to do with you, but you want to try and make yourself the go-to person. Or maybe you're seeing something that's kind of being discussed on social media in your local area and you're thinking the press might cover it. Just put your hand up, speak to your local paper and go, this is really interesting. I think I've got quite an interesting perspective. I can speak, I work with young people these ages, and do you want me to provide a comment? So it's just kind of showing it's similar principles can apply on a more kind of regional level, I guess. Thanks, Shannon.
Yeah, no, thanks, Abby. I think that's absolutely spot on, particularly with the regional media piece. We'll talk about it a bit more further down, but the relationship building is so important. And actually, where the national press might have higher demands in terms of how to create a story, regional media and local area titles are so keen always to build relationships with projects in their area, and they are a lot more open to hearing about stories, and they want to collaborate because it's the focus is a lot more on community. So exactly as Abby said, I think a key part is really kind of identifying who it is that is writing, just reading the press, seeing which names are cropping up frequently about covering stories in your area, and then building that relationship, reaching out, letting them know about what you're doing, the work that you're doing, and the kind of stories that you'll have for them. And then you can build that relationship. And it's exactly as Abby said, the moment they're coming to write something that might feel relevant, they'll come straight to you. And that's when you get this really nice meeting of, you go to them when they've got when you've got relevant news and natural news to share, but then them coming to you as well when they're writing about something that you might be able to have a voice in. So that's kind of the key bit on the moment of when to tell the story and when you might have a story. The next is the message, and being really clear on the main messages that you want to get across. I think the main thing I would say here is not overcomplicating it. I think we get so in, and everyone gets, faces the same challenges. You're so invested and you're so in the weeds of the day-to-day work and what you really believe in as a team and as a project. And when it comes to the message, it's about kind of taking yourself a step removed and thinking about, right, first of all, what is the purpose? What are we here to do? How are we making a difference? And what are our key missions that we live by every day? And how can we sum that up in one line? And that's usually the biggest challenge, is really kind of condensing it. But it's the first thing. Think always, right, if I had, one sentence to explain exactly what our purpose is, what is that? And that's the starting point for what your message should be. The second is, what are you achieving? What are the successes that you've had recently? You've got, this is what we're trying to do. What has happened so far? How far along on your journey are you? And I think it's a really important point to make about that journey. Whilst media are becoming more kind of savvy all the time to how important it is for change to happen, and readers and kind of general communities are becoming more impatient with it, everyone understands that it is a journey, and don't ever feel like you have got to be at the point of completion, or when you've reached all your objectives, that's when there's a story to tell. Those key milestones along the way, receiving funding, that's a brilliant message, and that's a brilliant achievement to be able to talk about. So to kind of really think about those little moments that then you can share and of success, that will help to kind of celebrate your work, but also raise awareness of why it's so important. And that brings me on to the third point. Why is it important? Great that you've got this mission, great that you've had this success. What is the bigger picture that makes this so important? Is it, for example, that, you've received this funding and you're going to use it to, invest in this group of the community? Well, why is that? What does it mean for their futures? What does it mean for the category that you're within, the sector? What does it mean for the industry that you're in? How is it playing a part in the bigger picture of what you're trying to do? And that's where the newsworthiness comes from it as well. So obviously points 1 and 2 are a lot more looking inwards at your project and the work that you're doing. Point 3 is more about, this is why we're needed within society and within our local community.
And I think, sorry if you don't mind me jumping in, Shannon, I think as well, just to build on that, like, let's say that you are launching a project, it's worth thinking at the outset of, well, before you start on the project, like, okay, I've got this whole thing happening, how can I create a media moment throughout it? Like, and it might be almost, sometimes sometimes it can cause you to do something that you wouldn't normally do, just to try and get some media coverage. So for example, as Shannon rightly said, announcing funding, brilliant, that's a really good moment. And then could there be a moment where you're actually promoting the project that you're doing and calling on young people in the local community to sign up, for instance? Even if you've only got a couple of spaces left, that's still a potential media moment. Are you calling out for new staff? That's another, because in local community, that's about job opportunities. So that's could even be a different section of the newspaper. Could you do a consultation with the local community to find out what topics should be covered on your project? And then is there a moment sort of towards the end? So it's like building in, or some of them will be really natural moments, but you might be almost manufacturing moments that kind of can create a bit of news buzz. And we've definitely find it with anything, even say the Youth Music Awards, we build about 5 of these moments into the project. They don't all land, but you're then spreading your risk in terms of, okay, well, that one didn't quite land, but we've still got this one coming, because you also just never know what's going to come up in the media at that time. So for instance, on the Youth Music Awards again, I think we had one year, the day of, we had Liz Truss resigned, I think, and then the Queen was unwell, or when we were announcing nominees or something, and the news just completely scuppered our story. So from that we learned that we need to build in kind of more assurances along the way that if we can't put all our eggs in one basket and guarantee that it has to be hinged on this one moment. And so you're kind of protecting yourself as well.
Yeah, I think that's really sound advice, Abby, and that a good way as well of noticing what those moments could be is also just talking to people outside of your project. And this probably feels really obvious, and I'm sure we all kind of will go home and talk to our friends, family about what we've been doing at work. But I think that's where you really kind of start to spot reactions and understand where there might be moments of interest to other people, because I think, yes, it can be quite daunting thinking about, I need to land this story in the media, but remembering that journalists are also consumers. Journalists are, very much like your friends in terms of they're going to react to your stories in the way that your friends and family might. And a lot of the time, I think we take for granted the great work that we're doing because it's every day and it's just natural to us. Sorry, the light in this room tends to go off, so I'm just gonna move so it comes back on. So it's just the talking to people and understanding actually there's something in this and there's something really interesting about this. We find often when we're working with brands that we'll kind of talk to them about what's happening throughout the year, and kind of key moments for them, and they will name maybe three or four, but actually it's when we start really working with them, start talking to them, generally start talking to more members of the team, that things come up that they don't realize is a really interesting story to tell because it's just part of their day-to-day. So I would say talk to as many people as you can, within reason and within the realms of what you can share, and spot signs of that interest being piqued. Because if it's interesting to Joe Public, then it's going to be interesting to the media because they're basically just your gateway to telling that story to Joe Public. So it might feel really obvious, but yeah, a lot of the time, particularly to Abby's point about those making the most of different moments along the journey or creating those little stories, just kind of think more broadly about every the work that you're doing every day, because there could really be something in it. And the third point is the materials. And this kind of comes into, I guess, how you're telling that story and how you're telling that message. The first thing, before even thinking about, PR as a press release or, an image or anything like that, when it comes to materials and assets, it's who is your audience, and who are you selling the story to? Who are you wanting to reach in the end? And what is the best way of doing that? And I think this is something where probably the biggest change in the last few years has happened within PR, where the only way of reaching people traditionally with a story about your brand was through traditional media, so newspapers, maybe magazines, maybe even broadcast. Now, you guys will all know yourself, how much do you find out about news on X or on Instagram or through someone sending you something on TikTok, and that's how you learn about something or hear about something. It's not all just through adverts or traditional media anymore. So before kind of thinking about, right, this is how we're going to tell our story, really kind of ask who is our audience and how are they consuming their media. Again, talking to people, asking about how they find their news. It might be that a lot of the time, you're looking to engage an audience that spends a lot of their time online, through either kind of their own personal work or through their own interests. And therefore, you might be led then more towards online media. So, your local press and your local titles, absolutely, but they're digital versions of that title. And then also thinking beyond traditional media and thinking about social media. So do we need to be creating, yes, a story that will be received well by media, but then do we also need some assets that can live on social, for example? So that's kind of the number one point I would say when it comes to creating materials. Then you can think about, right, okay, we know our audience, we know they are primarily online for argument's sake. Now it's about thinking, okay, what are the materials that will help convey this message to that audience? So press release is always a really good one. I know it sounds like I'm saying don't just always go towards press release, but when it comes to actually telling your story and giving that bigger picture and thinking about ticking those three boxes of, what your mission is or what your successes have been and why it's important within the bigger picture, press release is a really great way of doing that, and we'll come into a bit more what makes a really good press release. And then you can think about, okay, we know we need to tell that story, but if it's for an online digital version, for example, a digital title, then we can add in a lot of information there. So, you know, you have seen, I'm sure, when you go on, you know, whether it be Mail Online or, you know, the online versions of your local press, the articles are a lot longer, they feature a lot more, so you've got a lot more room to tell more of a story. Where if your audience, sorry, are primarily consuming news in newspapers, and then you can see, or magazines, for example, or on social media, then suddenly the messaging that you're able to come across gets whittled down quite quickly, and you haven't got as much space to tell that story. So then it's about making 3 really key points, which we mentioned before in the message, making them most as succinctly as you can. Imagery and content is really key. Images just really help to bring the story to life, you know, and when we talk about why we're important and the impact that we're having as a project, for example, then show that impact. You know, what photography have you got at your hands that you can use to kind of show exactly, you know, give that human element of this is the impact that we're having, this is why we're important. And if you haven't got it, and, you know, appreciate that not everyone's got the luxury of being able to shoot their own content, you know, just think about what you can do, literally even just with phones. You know, not every story needs a professional photographer hired. A lot of digital media, particularly when it comes to their social media channels, are happy now with kind of more raw footage and raw content. So you can think about, when it comes to particularly telling your message across social media channels, how you can use the devices that you've got at your disposal to kind of really capture that content. But absolutely, yes, press releases are great, but bring it to life in a bit more of an interesting way, particularly if you are in a creative space. Then it's the best way to be able to tell your story if you can kind of show exactly what it looks like. And that goes for content as well, video content. You know, more and more video content is being really kind of sought after with media, not only because it's obviously interesting for people to watch and our attention spans are getting a lot shorter, and, you know, people aren't kind of scrolling through text as much as they used to. They're looking for something to stop their thumb when they're scrolling through Instagram, through X, through TikTok. So content's really important in that way for media, because they know that's how their audience or their readers are going to look for content. But the other thing as well is media can then put advertising around video. So for example, if you go on, obviously YouTube being the main one, but even if you go on a video on the Mail Online, for example, there'll often be video adverts around that. So the minute you're giving them video content, it means then that they've got another asset that they can sell advertising around. Again, it can be really expensive, so appreciate not everyone can, you know, has the luxury of that, but it's just something to consider in terms of how you can bring to life the story that you're telling in your press release through different materials. A link to the website or someone to find out more is really important as a call to action. So, you know, don't do all the hard work of telling this great story and then kind of leaving people without anything to go and find out more if they are interested, engaged, want to help. It might be that, you know, to Abby's point, that you are hiring or you're kind of looking to recruit. And so what are the pages on your website that you can drive people directly to, because they will utilize those links if you're sharing them. So again, remember that PR is not all just a way to kind of tell your story, but it is a way to get your audience to engage with your project as well. And the third one, I kind of touched on this with the message, but again, with the materials, don't overcomplicate it. Don't think you need to do all of the above. It's just about what is right for the message that you're telling and being as clear as possible. And back to my point on talking to people about it, you know, how would you tell your friends about it? How would you talk to your family about it? And thinking about the best way to kind of simplify it rather than worrying too much about writing in the style of the title you're reaching. Yes, obviously you need to consider that it is going through someone else, and so they need to be able to read it and understand it straight away. But that's exactly back to the point of simplicity is really key. If you were going to say the headline, for example, to your friend and they weren't going to understand it like that immediately, then it's going to be really hard to get the journalist to engage. So yeah, as simple and as kind of straightforward and digestible as possible.
Shannon, I was just gonna. Oh, you're doing. Sorry, you're going on to press release now. I was just going to say a little cheat as well for press releases that I find really helpful. Is just use. I'm sure everyone knows, but on Google you've got a news filter. So where you've got like you can click images and those things. There is a news one. So if you were to search charity announces ambassador, or charity launches fundraiser, or charity announces new funding or project, whatever, and then click on the news filter, and then you're going to see, and the same, I appreciate there's some artists on this call as well, so likewise, you know, if you're an artist releasing your single or whatever, and then have a look and just literally read through the ones you think are most interesting, and then you've got ready-made templates for you. You just need to obviously swap out, you know, take the bits that you like, that you think, but ultimately that's what journalists are actually running with. That's the end product that they're willing to use. So yeah, hopefully that's another helpful little cheat, especially if you haven't got loads of time.
Exactly. And remembering that you are a consumer yourselves as well. So whilst you might be an artist releasing new music, or you're working with a project, you know, thinking about looking at those articles, what makes you really interested in them? What kind of headlines make you want to read on? What kind of first paragraphs make you want to read on even more? What are the bits that make you really interested? And what's going to make you go and find out more? Asking yourself those questions as you're reading other people's materials will really help then when it comes to writing your own, for sure. So on that, so the kind of key press release elements that we always think about when it comes to kind of putting pen to paper, the first is the headline being the most important piece, of course, and it will come as no surprise when I say it just needs to be as attention grabbing as possible. Now, this isn't to say it needs to be outrageous or it needs to be particularly controversial, but it just needs to be, you know, where it comes to your three messages that we discussed before, you know, what's your mission, what are your successes, and why is it important? Those latter two will be the ones that are really kind of key to think about here in terms of making it attention grabbing. You know, what is it that you're doing or you've just done that you're celebrating, and why is that interesting, and getting that into the initial headline. If I had to kind of give one favorite tip, it would probably be, and I'm sure Abby will be used to this, and I know is very good at it herself, but puns always work. Journalists love puns. It's just kind of, again, it humanizes the story that you're telling. It draws a bit of a smile. And it also just makes them want to read on because it stands out a bit more in their inbox. One thing I would really say is, you know, journalists are receiving hundreds, if not thousands, of emails every day. So, you know, if you can get them on the phone, great. If it's that you're kind of relying on emails to get their attention, then again, that headline being as attention grabbing as possible is really important, and popping it in the subject as well. So they don't even need to open the email to know that this is something really interesting and this is something really exciting that they're going to want to read about. And then when it comes to the body of your press release, I always think about the kind of 5 W's. So who, what, when, where, and why. And that's kind of the first place to start when it comes to writing a press release. So just kind of noting down, even before, you know, you start on the release, who is it that is telling this story? You know, what is the project? Who are you as an artist? What is it that you're telling? What's the message? What's the interesting thing that you want to share? When, you know, if it's kind of you're launching fundraising, then when does it start? When does it close? You know, the key kind of any key dates. If you're recruiting, when are you opening for applications? If you're announcing, you know, a new team member, when are they starting? So all the kind of key moments that make up your story, getting that in there, because not only will this help to tell your story, but it also gives the journalists a sense of urgency and a sense of relevance. So, you know, if they don't know when it's happening, or if it feels like it might not be happening for a while, then it might feel to them that they don't need to write about it yet. So really kind of giving that context of this is happening now, this is exciting now, and this is why you should talk about it now. Where, obviously kind of a really key one, but particularly when it comes to your local media, including where as early as possible will really help to show again why it's relevant to them. You know, what is the community that you're helping? Where is it that you're based? And then of course why, and back to that message, why is it important to the wider community? A spokesperson quote is a really key one as well. So, you know, again, adding that humanity to the piece. So yes, you've got a great story, you might have a great image to support it, but actually, who is it? Give a voice to the story. So it might be you know, a member of your team, but somebody basically behind the project, or it might be you yourself if, for example, you're an artist releasing new music. Another great thing as well, if you have received funding from a partner, then include a quote from them as well, and we'll come on to a bit more about that. And then finally, a call to action. Like I said, don't do all the hard work of getting someone's attention and don't send them anywhere. What is it that you want them to do? Do you want them to go and find out more? Do you want them to go on the website? Do you want them to go to and donate funds? And then the final one is just signing off. And this is something that people can often forget. But again, you want to build a relationship with journalists and the media, or you might want people to get in touch to find out more about your project or your, you know, what you're up to. So making sure that you've got a notes to editors at the bottom, just a little section that then talks about how they can get in touch if they do want to hear more. Here's just a quick example of, you know, a great press release that's been picked up in the press. So this is Distorted announcing a paid internship program. So you can see great snappy headline, what they're launching, and how. Great image to bring it to life, you know, again, so people understand straight away what This Is Distorted is. And then you've got the key 5 W's in there as well as a spokesperson quote. But then we've got a quote from Matt from Youth Music in there again, which kind of adds that third-party credibility. And on that, why that's so important is, as I said, it drives that credibility, you know, particularly if, to Abby's point, where this is something that can be really helpful in terms of that halo effect. If you're focusing on kind of local media and you're telling your story locally, then working with a partner or having a voice in there from a partner that has greater awareness can really help you elevate that, and you can almost leverage their awareness to help get your story out there. Paints a broader picture, so that point that we spoke about on why is this important to greater community, another voice can really help to shape that and to tell that story and give it a bit more of a layer. And it just adds another voice when we talk about humanizing the piece and showing that, you know, it's impacting. I'm sure everyone on this call, what you're doing every day is impacting other people. So adding a voice from someone else can really help to show exactly how you're doing that. And then the fourth point is the media. So you've got your moment you want to announce, you've got your message, you've got your materials. Finally, it's about getting it out there. So again, back to the point, who is your target audience? You know, don't always just automatically think we want to go with national media. It might not be right. It might not always be as well that, you know, your local media are the ones where you're going to be able to get a message across quickly. You know, if you're engaging an audience that are primarily on social channels, then, you know, going to Lincolnshire Live, for example, as a first point might not be your quickest way and most efficient way to access them. So think about who is your audience and what are the channels and who are the media that are going to help you reach them. So if they're, you know, a very young audience that's consuming news primarily on social media, then you can go to, you know, I've got Liverpool Echo here as an example, but they will have a social team. Go to them and talk about how you can work with them, give them assets, give them news for their social channels, because that's more likely where your audience is going to see the news. And then how you should reach them. So this is going to feel really obvious, but the main point of voice, that main piece of advice that I will always say is just consume the media as much as you can yourselves. You know, is there a title that you're particularly trying to get into? Read it constantly. Like I said earlier, spot those names that are coming up quite a lot who are writing about the kind of stories that you want to tell. Get in touch with them, reach out, ask for a coffee, ask them to tell you more, ask them what they've got coming up that you can maybe feed into. I think it's all about the relationship piece that Abby mentioned earlier. So how can you really kind of start to build those? And yeah, just reach out, just you know, have that first conversation with them, and it can really build from there. Another point, again, if you're working within more of a social media realm, a lot of journalists, you'll be surprised at how many now do look for stories on X. So local media particularly will use X. They'll use hashtag journo request. which is worth exploring sometimes to see what stories they're looking for, and then you can spot something that you might be relevant for, or even sliding into their DMs on Instagram. If there's, you know, an Instagram channel for that specific title, they will look for stories in there as well. And then I mentioned right at the beginning, but don't forget the power of your own channels. So a lot of PR is thinking about, you know, how can we get our story placed on other channels? But remember that you have got a community as well, and share your news across there. You know, even if you get a great piece of coverage in a media title, how can you bring that to life across your own channels? How can you share it? If you're creating great images or great video content for your press release, for media, push it out on your own channels as well, because it's a very good and quick way to get a reaction and to kind of test how things are being received from your existing community. And it's kind of the best test bed in terms of if a piece of coverage is really working to engage the kind of audience that you want to engage. I'm conscious of time, so we just wanted to kind of bring all this to life, and I'm going to kind of stop talking about my tips for a moment, because one project that we know is really kind of getting involved in PR and it's really working for is Steps. And I think we've got Tom on the call here as well, who's going to tell us a bit more about it. Tom, are you still with us? Great. Hello.
Yeah.
Do you mind just doing a bit of a quick introduction?
Yeah, sure. My name's Tom Lane. I'm the principal youth worker at Steps Club for Young People, which is a charity-run youth centre in Weymouth in Dorset. And we've, about 6 months ago, started running a youth music-funded youth music project.
Brilliant. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, it's worth me just mentioning that I'm by no means a media or PR expert, but I have been a youth worker for 37 years and built good relationships with the media generally. So I'm here to learn the same as everyone else, but just offered to share some experience.
Thank you, appreciate that. And we can see obviously from the piece on screen, but you've had some success in PR. So kind of what has been your approach to PR and kind of telling your stories?
Well, I suppose there's a number of things. I mean, my over the years, my experience is that the best way to get stories out there is to build individual relationships with people working within the media, particularly locally, obviously. And I'll obviously be saying a lot of things that all you guys already know and are doing already. But that's certainly been the most successful thing for us. So with particularly our local newspaper, you see there the image of the Echo. But with online news, there's a growing number of online news channels, local radio and television, including, you know, BBC, ITV, local channels, and even some national media. And building relationships with individuals within the media, talking to them before sending press releases out. I tend to phone certain key people up in the media to have a chat with them and say, I'm just about to send you a press release about this. Here's a bit more, and have a chat with them to enthuse them before they receive the press release. Adding those key individuals within the media to social media groups, tagging them to things. And I mean, an example of that is Greatest Hits Radio, which obviously is national, but localized in each region. And they just recently picked up on our youth music project because we tagged them into a social media post, and ended up doing an interview with me about it that they put out, you know, once an hour all over the weekend every morning, which was great. And that was them sort of getting in touch with me, having seen something on our social media. Inviting those key media people to events and celebrations, awards evenings, things like that, or to meet some of your young people, or to come to events that you hold, inviting them along. They can, you know, you could name something after their an award, for example, after their media company. They can present awards or certificates to young people, things like that, and they obviously love that. Encouraging case studies, obviously. Young people's journeys are obviously really powerful things, and they love a good case study. So young people's journeys, young people's achievements, and ideally to get to the point that they phone you, you become their go-to person for stories to do with young people, or stories to do with music and young people, or creative arts and young people, or you know, examples of that. Just last week, I was contacted by my guy at the Echo because some latest poverty statistics had come out. You know, number of young people living in poverty. So they phoned me for a chat. I'm sure lots of you have this happen to you, but ideally that's what happens. You get to the point that you're their go-to person, and while they're on the phone talking about poverty stats, you plug the latest youth music thing that you're doing to make sure they're going to be covering that. So so that's my sort of number one piece of advice, I suppose, is over time to build those relationships with individuals in the media.
Great, thank you, Tom. And there's some really interesting points in there as well. You know, everything that you mentioned about if you're having an event, make sure that you're inviting them down. Again, it's the kind of giving them that first-hand experience of what you're doing and showing them why it matters and the impact it's having. It sounds like you've got some really brilliant relationships built there. How did you kind of start them? Was it just kind of yourself going out and finding them through, you know, reading the local media? Was it through social media, just where you're kind of tagging the titles?
Yeah, a bit of everything really. And like I say, I've been a youth worker 37 years and 30 years in this post. I've been at Steps, my youth club, for a long time. So over that time, you just obviously get to build those relationships. And yeah, I mean, I'm not by any means, and we're not groundbreaking in terms of modern media and social media particularly, but we are starting to use those things much more, and noticed you know, and probably in every area now, there's a lot of local online media companies, you know, online news companies that are crying out for content. So we're trying to latch onto that and make sure we're getting stuff to them. So yeah. I was going to just mention something about press releases that somebody told me a long time ago, and I find very useful, which is that because I became very frustrated that that organisations like the Echo often change what you send them. You know, you work very hard to send them very specific content, and then they rewrite it, sometimes get it totally wrong, change the meaning or whatever. But they shouldn't mess with quotes. Quotes are quotes, and they shouldn't change them. So somebody a long time ago said to me, put the most important stuff in quotes, preferably quotes from young people, and they'll probably include those, and they shouldn't mess with them. So that's a good tip, I guess.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, we also, obviously, because so much is online now, we try and send film clips as well as photos. Photos, we always include captions, because otherwise they tend to not know. It's very easy to send photos without thinking how they should be captioned, and then the media might caption them in a way that you're like, that really wasn't what I wanted. So I always include captions for photos, and often now little film clips and things as well. A lovely example actually recently of film clips getting picked up was we did a Name That Tune thing. For those old enough to remember Name That Tune, with our youth music project, we had a couple of young people doing little intros, just a few notes, you know, maybe 5 or 6 notes of an intro of a song, and we did a dozen of them, put them out onto social media so that people could play Name That Tune. And that was really fun, and was shared really widely and picked up by some other media. So that was great. I was going to say that I just wanted to check a couple of notes that I wrote just to share with you. So we promoted our work a lot in the community, and through doing that, I think the thing that's been that we really wanted to achieve over the years has been to gain community support and community buy-in for what we're doing. This is in terms of how it's helped us as a charity. The media that we've managed to get out there has really meant that pretty much everyone in the community knows what we're about, knows the value of our work, knows about the effect that has on our young people, the journeys of change that our young people have been through through participating in things with us. And you know, that's useful in lots and lots of ways, including when it comes to to fundraising. You know, we get a lot of community support for fundraising activities and events. And it's also, I think, really positively changed the way that our community view young people. There have been times in the past, perhaps, where young people are viewed as a problem for the community or for society, and get a very bad press. You know, every now and then the press is flooded with stories that are negative about young people. But I think over years of trying to you know, get good news stories and young people's positive contributions and creativity, and you know, the wonderfulness of young people into the media, I think our community really is very supportive of our young people now, and we've managed to sort of change perceptions in that way. And another thing that's contributed to that was our local newspaper several years ago offering for young people to write a young people section of the newspaper. Some of you may have done that in your areas as well. If you haven't already, most local newspapers are up for that. They're up for supporting and guiding young people to produce and edit their own content, and maybe have a section in the middle of the newspaper on a Saturday that's written by young people, which obviously that's been great. Yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. And obviously kind of a clear way of seeing how much PR has kind of helped you and helped build and really help establish your role in the community as well. So thanks for sharing that. There's some really interesting points in there, and some good tips as well. I think that particularly the quote one as well, hopefully people will take away with them, because yeah, they can't mess with quotes. So it's a really good opportunity to kind of secure your message. So then, yeah, before we'll open to some questions, but just kind of to recap those 4 M's to really kind of keep in mind. The first being the moment. When is it that you want to announce? When have you got some news to share, or when can you inject yourself in conversation? The message. What is the message that you want to convey? The materials. What can you use? Press release, images, video, etc., to help tell your story. And finally, media. What are the best places to tell your story? Who do you want to tell them to, and how are you going to reach your audience?